Be the entropy you want to see in the world, I think. I feel like I've just been turned upside down and gently shaken. So thank you for managing to pull that off in 12 minutes. I think it's great to finish a session like this, and I wasn't here yesterday, unfortunately. I've caught bits of today, but often, in the Australian political context anyway, non-violent direct action can be the last thing. It can actually be the end of the line when all the other processes have failed and you're up against the wall. That's when people say, well, I'm going to put myself in the way, because everything else, politics has failed, process has failed, the Environmental Protection Act has failed. The only thing left to do is put ourselves in front of equipment. So it's kind of nice to finish up here today. Here we are at the last stand. It's also one of the things, I guess, that sets us apart as a party is our quite unfailing and unstinting support and recognition of the legitimacy of NVA as you've said, kind of one of the foundations of democracy. And not in a theoretical way, but a lot of our MPs come from that background. Not everyone, and not to stick it up on too high a pedestal, which I'll get to in a second, but the fact that we do kind of have our roots in forest campaigns, in anti-nuclear work, in other campaign types, animal justice stuff, land rights campaigning, where rules are broken, laws are broken if they're unjust for purposes that are manifestly just. And we're not ashamed of that. It's not something that is awkward. I think it is actually in our party's DNA, and we should protect that. Not I guess having the luxury of either studying it for a living or working for a living, kind of like the Greenpeace is working out where this fits in a overall campaign context. I came across it in direct action in 1998. It was the first thing I ever did, the Jabiluka campaign, which was kind of a bit like the Franklin for people of my generation, people who came through a little bit later than that. And seeing as a young person how it felt like we were at the end of the line, and as it turned out, it was part of a whole very complex campaign around World Heritage listing, around changing the laws, around legal challenges that were going on that we didn't know that much about. The 98 election campaign, there's an entire spectrum of the campaign occurring, but the really high profile stuff that felt as though it was last stand was we got to stop the drill getting onto the mineral lease before the wet season starts. There you go. See if you can figure out how to do that. A very physical, quite visceral thing to have to do. Not that long after, sort of late stages of the old growth forest campaign in WA, after having kind of been freshly arrested more or less as a foot soldier at Jabiluka, spilled into the forest campaign that people had been working on and camping and getting rained on and sitting in the mud for 30 years. Right at the very end, where they pushed it into political legitimacy, where direct action, people up on tree platforms and sitting on tripods across logging roads, had spawned and inspired doctors and people with suits and mobile phones, which were quite a big thing in 1998, for those of you who can remember that far back, on St George's Terrace, and it had crossed over into legitimacy. That's like, well, ordinary western suburbs in Perth, that's reversed from here, white, respectable people are going to go down and drop bags of cement and food off to these kids because we strongly support, and you can see how broken the system is. So we'll support this otherwise unorthodox and in fact quite unlawful set of campaigning. And I was in the privileged position, and it took me a while to unpick this, of both of those campaigns being quite successful shortly after I turned up. Boom, boom. It's like, why didn't we think of this before? People, just go out and get yourself arrested and then you win. A short time after that, actually, I don't know whether anybody was involved in this, at the campaign to stop the Beverley uranium mine in central South Australia, the blockade crew rocked up and they were locked in a shipping container by Star Force police and pepper sprayed, traumatised, arrested, and that blockade was smashed violently in some of the worst instances of police violence I've ever seen in this country, and then they built the mine right on top of them. So that was innocence lost immediately. Sometimes your blockade camp gets rolled over and you stumble out of it with post-traumatic stress disorder and a loss, and they flatten the ecosystem that you were trying to protect. So not valorising direct action too much, I think, is also quite important. Like the person who dug the shit pit is actually just as important as the hardcore kid with his arm in a pipe, without all of those parts. And for that matter, the person in the suburbs who didn't have the time to come down but donated $50 so that somebody else could go. It all goes into it, and I think maybe not valorising it and sticking it up on too much of a pedestal is actually also quite important. My context, I suppose, for this work, two people who were quite influential in my thinking on where this kind of fits within the broader context. One of them is Joanna Macy, who talks about hands, head and heart. And the hands campaign are the protective actions in defence of life on Earth. And that's the high profile stuff where you'll drop a banner, you'll put yourself up a platform, you physically intervene in these processes that are smashing up the biosphere and community. Then the head is those people whose talent and contribution is rethinking the institutions that actually meant that you had to go out and blockade in the first place and kind of rewiring the DNA of society. And then the heart is the social and internal spiritual shift that actually causes to think that participating in mass extinction and war all over the place is actually perfectly normal. Without that internal psychic or psychological shift, the other two will end up futile. I found that quite important because then suddenly I could see where all the different talented people I could see part of the movement sort of fitted, that really everybody had their place in that, and I felt like I did as well. And the other one is Bill Moyer, who is an American proponent, I guess, of this, whose movement theory, I mean, it's a bit clunky and it comes with diagrams and stuff, but you can actually see the role of the direct action person, the people sticking a spanner into the machinery, and then kind of building legitimacy where then people can actually go into Parliament and write the Clean Air Act or the Environmental Protection Act. And if there's respect at all four stages of that movement, which again, it's a schematic that you might find a little bit two-dimensional. But I guess what I liked was the idea that if the person in Parliament and the person up to their knees in mud with their arm down a pipe respect each other and understand how they're kind of part of the same thing, then you can actually create lasting change. But one without the other is actually not, you won't ultimately be successful. Because often the non-violent direct action can be the desperate last stand, and often, I guess, if anybody's been a part of this stuff, yes, it's often successful, but often you know that all you're doing is buying a day at a time, and eventually you will get rolled over because the state is more powerful than us, except suddenly when it's not. And I got to rock up at Bentley after all the work had been done, thinking we were going to be there on the particular weekend when people were going to get pepper sprayed, and instead it was this gargantuan party because the system has a pain threshold. And I think you kind of nailed it with that, the entropy and the amount of kind of financial and legal and institutional complexity that goes into holding these huge structures in place. They can actually be really brittle. That's why I think the 350, that's financial investment direct action, if you like, is one of the few things in the climate movement at the moment that gives me genuine hope. Go after the DNA, go after the money. It's what they understand. That's a form of direct action as well, if you will, and thinking a little bit creatively. A couple of really quick things to round up. If you're going to be good at it, what I discovered really early is that you need training and mentoring. Do not send kids who have kind of not seen this stuff before into the front line where they may well be exposed to police violence or situations that are volatile and very, very difficult to kind of rein in once skirmishes start and once people start losing it a little bit. And then also post support. So yeah, get on TV, get the image of the tripod and the kind of really iconic stuff in front of millions of people, and on a good day you actually can do that. Don't forget jail solidarity. Don't forget raising money for fines for people who can be paying this stuff off for months or even years after everybody forgot about the action. And don't forget that this stuff actually does traumatise people, like actual trauma. I'm presuming it's the same in New South Wales and Vic and Tassie. Watching an ecosystem that you were trying to protect be obliterated and turned into a moonscape is personally really horrifying for people who thought that putting themselves in the way would be enough to stop it from happening. And I guess on a good day, and we saw this at Bentley beautifully, it's community building. It is not just about digging a dragon into a road. You actually build community around this stuff. That is profoundly important, and the stuff that I think that lasts after people have forgotten maybe what it was that the action even was. All right, I'll leave it there. That's probably gone on well long enough. Thank you.